Subscribe to our YouTube channel and press the bell icon to get the latest updates.
I'm with Amar Sinha, India's former ambassador to Tajikistan, which is one of Afghanistan's neighbor. He was there from 2007 to 10, and then India's ambassador to Afghanistan from 2013 to 16. And with Mr. Davood Moradian, he's an Afghan, the director of the Afghanistan Institute of Strategic Studies, no longer in Kabul, of course, fled Kabul about 3 months ago when the Taliban took Kabul. Right now, Mr. Moradian is in Mashhad, which is a border town between Iran and Afghanistan. Iran, of course, a neighbor of Afghanistan, a very, very important player. And today we are talking about the situation in Afghanistan, as well as the conference that was held in New Delhi on Wednesday, hosted by India's National Security Advisor, Ajit Doval, when senior security officials from the region were present. Gentlemen, Mr. Moradian and Amar Sinha, welcome to The Print.
Thank you.
Pleasure.
So, Mr. Moradian, my first question to you, this is the first time that I'm seeing you on video since the fall of Kabul. You are in Mashhad. Your first comments on the conference in Delhi on Afghanistan, what do you think about it?
First, thank you for having me. You said that I feel it Kabul. No, Kabul is part of every Afghan. So whenever we are in Kabul. Of course, the circumstance has changed, that we may not be physically in Kabul, but Kabul Herat is always with us. So yeah. As of your question, I think it is an important that Delhi finally get together after the shocking development that took place on August 15th, which surprised almost everyone, including the Indian governments. And during those 2-3 months, there was nothing coming out of Delhi. Even the Prime Minister's, to my best recollection, didn't mention Afghanistan in any of its active public diplomacy. Even with the MEA, National Security Advisor, they hardly make any reference to situation in Afghanistan except some occasional intervention. The fact that the Delhi has returned to the game, quote unquote, I think is a positive development.
Right. Ambassador Sinha, your first comments on the conference hosted by India's National Security Advisor, the fact that the Russian National Security Advisor, Mr. Nikolai Patrushev, the topmost security official from Iran, as well as all 5 Central Asian countries were in Delhi on Wednesday afternoon. But the senior officials, the senior security officials from Pakistan and China did not come.
Well, let me tell you one thing. First, let me just react to what Davood said, that nobody spoke for the last 3 months. I don't think that is correct. We had 2 sessions in the UN Security Council. There was a UN Security Council resolution 2593. PM spoke at G20 special summit on Afghanistan humanitarian assistance. He spoke at SCO-CSTO joint meeting on Afghanistan. In fact, it is true for a month nobody spoke because everybody was taking stock. But I think Prime Minister Modi in September had made India's position very clear. And he had also urged the international community that we don't have to rush into it. The actions that we take on Afghanistan in future recognition, how to deal with Taliban government has to be consultative, and we have to build a consensus. So now, having said that, I think the NSA's meeting is perhaps building up on the same effort to build consensus. This regional security dialogue, as you know, has happened twice before also, in Iran in 2018, 2019. Noteworthy thing, Pakistan did not attend those 2 also. Of course, this time it was in India. The difference was that this was the first time after the political scenario in Afghanistan has changed, the post-Taliban regime, and India got all the immediate neighbors and people, countries concerned. And I just stated that actually, absence of 1 or 2, China have always held that China needs to develop an independent policy line on Afghanistan, but it plays whatever the script is given to them by Pakistan. But importantly, look at the countries which have attended. These are immediate neighbors. These are the people who are concerned about the people of Afghanistan. Countries which I think, like Pakistan, look at the strategic gains, or who are looking at just the territory or the minerals in the territory and forgetting the people, they have not attended. And I think such conferences will start differentiating the countries and how they look at Afghanistan, just as a strategic gain or as a country which is populated by 40 million people who have been subjugated by a terror group.
In strong words, Ambassador Sinha, you call the Taliban subjugating the people of Afghanistan. Mr. Moradian, two questions to you. The first is that do you think that China and Pakistan, by not attending this conference, that they slipped up, that they should have come to Delhi? And the second is the question of the Taliban regime subjugating the people of Afghanistan. After all, there are several embassies open in Kabul, notably by the Chinese, the Pakistanis, and the Russians. So your take on that?
I think the problem of Afghanistan crisis during the last 100 years has been a geopolitical crisis. And the geopolitical crisis involves alliance and counter-alliance of the external powers. We saw this at the late 19th century, early 20th century, that Afghanistan became a geopolitical tool between the British and Russia. And Afghanistan paid a huge price for that geopolitical. And then we saw during the Cold War, which again Afghanistan was dragged into the East and West geopolitical and ideological rivalry. And sadly, that geopolitical centric approach to Afghanistan is once again is being reinforced by alliance of the Taliban. Mm-hmm. Alliance of the Taliban, of course, the principal member of that alliance is Pakistan. But that alliance has a number of partners, junior partners, China, Russia, and the Islamic Republic of Iran, some section of the British system, some segment of the American system also are part of that Taliban alliance. Then we have an Afghanistan alliance, and that Afghanistan alliance, of course, India, many well-wisher in Europe, United Nations system as a whole, many people of the regions, including people of Pakistan and Iran, belong to Afghanistan alliance. Yes. Now that is the challenge for us is that which alliance will prevail? Is the Taliban alliance or Afghanistan alliance? I see in the Taliban alliance some serious contradiction. Mm-hmm. Some serious contradiction here is that we start with China, which is very important stakeholders in our regions. I think one we have to differentiate it between the Chinese public statement and what they are thinking, what is in their mind. The interaction that I have had with the Chinese scholar community, which reflect the Chinese official thinking, is that their heart is with Afghanistan alliance. Afghanistan alliance because they know Pakistan has become a security liability for China, and now Afghanistan is going to be added to that list of liability for China. Therefore, in Beijing, they have to follow this rhetorical approach that the China, Pakistan, all weathers. But at the end of the day, the Chinese, they are pragmatic, and there are some many wise people in Beijing that they can that they know what is happening. And I think for us, as a member of Afghanistan alliance, we have to try to expand our own alliance, and that means that we have to engage interact more with the Chinese, with the Iranians, with the Russians, with the element of British Americans who belong to the Taliban alliance.
That's fascinating. Ambassador Sinha, your comments on what Mr. Moradian just said, which is that when he speaks to the Chinese off the record, or at least Chinese strategic scholars, they are looking at Pakistan as a liability, not as an iron brother or as a blood brother, not as a close friend.
See, my interaction, of course, has been limited, but yes, I would agree. But that is the rational view. If intellectuals in Chinese are thinking that way, and they should rightly be wary of adding a second basket case because they and to their entire portfolio in this region. So they would be very careful. And of course, that lollipop of trillions of dollars of minerals have been sold to them, and they are being invited sort of rather anxiously to step into a quagmire. So Chinese are, I think, slightly more hard-headed, and they look even at Pakistan, not with the same rosy tinted glass that the US or the West looks at. I think they are more hard-headed in that. And you can see the slowing down of CPEC, the question of compensation for the 9 Chinese engineers who got killed in northern Pakistan, because of which work had stopped. So they tread carefully. But of course, they also have a long-term alliance with Pakistan, which has a different objective. I don't think it was centered on Afghanistan, but it has much bigger fish to fry. So Pakistan for them is an indispensable partner as of now. But we haven't seen Chinese rushing in to fill the vacuum as it was expected or was predicted. So I think they're also in a wait and watch mode.
So another quick question to you, Ambassador Sinha, which is that the question of recognition to the Taliban regime. Like you said, none of these countries, whether it's China, Russia, or even Pakistan, and we know that the Taliban foreign minister, Mr. Muttaqi, is in Islamabad for a conference that the Pakistanis are holding on Thursday afternoon. But the question is that while none of these countries have recognized the Taliban regime, what do you think India should do? Mr. Ambassador Sinha?
I think India's position has been made clear that we are in no rush to provide recognition. You see, recognition, and it's a quite ironic that many countries which have not recognized the government still have an embassy. These embassies were accredited to the Islamic Republic of Afghanistan, but they still continue there. Even the Taliban delegation, which is going to Islamabad today for the meeting, calls itself the government of Afghanistan. It doesn't call itself the government of Islamic Emirate of Afghanistan because they know they don't have recognition. Now, that recognition is not something that will come that easily. You see, because what they have done, this entire recognition thing was part of the Doha process, which had a second part after the deal with the Americans, which is the intra-Afghan part, where they would have sort of reintegrated peacefully and gained some legitimacy. Now, that because of the development of events, that process got short-circuited. Taliban did not engage. So they ended up grabbing power in Kabul by the force of the gun. Now, does that give them domestic legitimacy? And if they don't have that, then of course international recognition will not be that easy, and they would be disappointed, unfortunately. And that is what we are seeing, that none of these countries which look very eager to engage. And I think that was a misreading, and I have said this before, that their engagement during the negotiations should not be seen as translating into diplomatic recognition immediately once they capture power forcibly.
Right.
See.
Yeah. Mr. Moradian, I want to ask you, you've been living in Mashhad for the last couple of months, the first month after you left Kabul or fled Kabul. I know you don't like that word. You were in Turkey like many of your compatriots. But what are your thoughts on what the Indian government has been doing? We know that very, very few Afghan nationals have come into India in these last 3 months. But what are your thoughts on that?
I would like to give you a kind of, not a political answer, but a sort of philosophical answer. I think the crisis reveals people's and nations' true character. And since August 15, in Afghanistan, we have seen a politicized. Politicized mean that an entire political system was vanished, was eradicated. And that political system is not only about the government. Yes, we have seen the coup d'etat, we have seen a military defeat, we have seen a revolution. But what we have seen in Afghanistan is a politicized. An entire political system has been eradicated, and it has impacted the entire nation. Of course, it has been so far, fortunately, bloodless in terms of the physical process. But in terms of the political and cultural process that Afghanistan and Afghan have been paying, it has been a politicized. Every aspect of Afghan life has been turned down. And I think, and I have been saying this to my colleagues or family members, that our true characters will be revealed in this time of crisis. And for this matter, for India and for other nations also, their true characters will be seen in such crisis. Of course, it is easy to make friendship in time if your friend are rich, if your friend are prosperous. It's not a big deal. But the true test of friendship is revealed in times of crisis. And let history write about India's, Iran's, Russia, Japan's, US, true character as a nation. To what extent they would honor their friends in times of crisis.
So how do you think India is doing that? I mean, the National Security Advisor has hosted a conference. The Prime Minister has spoken. India, when it was at the Security Council, when it held the presidency for a month, there were 3 or 4 conferences in Afghanistan. But what is your point of view in terms of how India has dealt with the situation, and especially in terms of giving visas to Afghan nationals? What do you think? What are your thoughts on that?
I think the number speaks. I think you wrote an excellent piece, and no one knows how many Afghans have been giving visa. So I think let the number speaks.
Ambassador Sinha, so
the number of people who have been giving visa to Afghan, I think that would be an objective test to that question.
Ambassador Sinha, your comments on why do you think India is not giving visas to Afghan nationals? Mr. Moradian says that the number is 6 in the last 3 months after the physical visa was withdrawn and e-visas were introduced. I believe that 60,000 Afghans have applied for visas, but none have got any. Why do you think that happened?
I really don't know. There I have actually publicly stated that perhaps we have fallen short. We could have done much better, much more. Because it's not, you see, in an emergency, the demand for visa is for the additionality. So first we have to make up the gap. You see, we first actually started cancelling the existing visas. Do we have the number of how many existing visas or diplomatic passports who had a visa-free entry were denied? Because that is the first issue. Have we even compensated for that? That number, forget about the additionality. So that is a thing which unfortunately is not yet public. We don't know. But I know definitely it's not 6, but it cannot be very high either. And I have said this, and it's with great regret that I say that unfortunately we have fallen short. We have taken a very security sort of an attitude. I can fully understand the security concerns. Going forward, that will be a problem. That will be a huge impediment to people-to-people connect that we had with Afghanistan. Because how do you trust? But because once the new passports of, say, Islamic Emirates comes, which of course will not be recognized, will not issue visas. It's as clear as that. But in the existing Islamic Republic passports, people who have a track record of studying in India, who have traveled to India multiple times, who have multiple visas, they should, to my mind, qualify automatically. At least the passports which were issued much before August 15th. But this is something practical, sensible, interministerial, whole of the government approach has to be taken in Government of India. Many of us have been arguing and pleading for this, and hopefully somebody will listen one day.
But this interministerial coordination that you talk about, which I'm sure there must be taking place. But the fact remains that after the fall of Kabul, when a team went from India to bring all the Indian nationals back, including some journalists who were there, and after that we saw that some Afghan Sikhs were also brought out of Afghanistan, and we saw pictures of Union cabinet ministers, Mr. Hardeep Singh Puri, for example, carrying the sacred Sikh book on his head, on the Saropa. So how come Afghan Sikhs are being brought out, but not Afghan? I mean, I don't know if there are any Afghan Hindus left in Afghanistan, but I doubt that very much. But Afghan Muslims are not being given visas. I mean, isn't that a contradiction in terms, Ambassador Sinha?
No, to put it that in such sort of black and white, I wouldn't agree, because Afghan Sikhs, and there is a regime in India for persons of Indian origin. There is a system of OCI card, etc., to which they are eligible. So that is, we cannot compare that with the issue of visa. So I wouldn't look at it in terms of religion, but yes, definitely, I think government has taken a view in terms of looking at it in terms of security. And unfortunately, security, when you take this sort of a decision and you sort of put the curtains down or shut the doors, it becomes difficult to reopen it and to sort of drive common sense home again, that there are surely definite category of people who stand eligible, who stand tested and tried, and ultimately it is our friends who are suffering if we have a policy. People who are not have any connect with India, perhaps maybe not even look at India to come today. They may prefer Pakistan or Iran or wherever they have to go. So yes, it's a self-defeating policy to my mind.
Now, Mr. Moradian, what do you think? What kind of impact will this have on the minds of Afghans like yourself?
Let me clarify one point here, is that I think the Hindu and Sikhs are the indigenous citizens of Afghanistan. They are not migrant from another part of the world. Remember, Afghanistan was used to be a part of the Hindu kingdom. We had in Buddhists far before many nations. Therefore, those Sikh and Hindu are in Afghanistan. They are the citizens of Afghanistan. So therefore, they should not be seen as kind of a second-class citizen of the nation. Of course, we have this Islamist ideology who try to Islamize Afghan history, Afghan culture. No, Islam is a proud part of Islam, but Islam does not represent the entirety of Afghan history, Afghan culture. Before Islam came to Afghanistan, we were not Muslim, but we had a very proud history of the Buddhism, Sikhism, Zoroastrians, Greek here. Therefore, I think it would be absolutely wrong to see Afghans as only from a Islamic perspective. No, Islam is only part of this, and Islam certainly does not represent the entirety of Afghan history and Afghan cultures. As of your question, again, let history judge India's records, how it helped. Now, for example, in case of Bangladesh, now it is a proud episode of Indian history that India's intervention create a new independent nation of Bangladesh, and that time India was very generous in opening its doors to millions or 100,000 of people from Bangladesh who fled then the Pakistani army. And once again, we shall wait to see the history. But again, I have enormous belief that India will catch up. India will catch up, and we should not allow some security-centric bureaucrats, which now has occupied important position in daily bureaucracy, undermine a very sacred relationship that Afghanistan and India have had. So I believe that soon the common sense will prevail indeed when it comes to engaging with Afghanistan.
That was very movingly spoken, Mr. Moradian, giving us a sense of giving us a perspective on Afghanistan's history and its culture and its traditions. Ambassador Sinha, my question to you is about Russia, and how do you think Russia is going to engage with the new Afghanistan, or with the Naya Taliban regime in Kabul? And my second question to you is about ISIS-K, the Islamic State, which has been mounting several terror attacks inside Afghanistan. How do you look at this when they are when civilians are being killed under the Taliban regime?
Well, I don't know if civilians are being attacked by ISIS-K. Civilians in Afghanistan today are being actually.
Well, there were terror attacks that have been taking place in mosques, in Hindus, and in Mazar, and most recently in the Kabul military hospital in Kabul.
ISIS-K, for some reason, seems to be also attacking senior Taliban leaders and putting fear of God in them. So it's for the Taliban leadership to wonder what is happening. But it is very clear that this is coming out of the contradictions within the Taliban movement itself. There are two clear factions. One which is perhaps totally pro-Pakistan, one of which the traditional Taliban, I would call them today, the Kandharis, which have been sidelined, which were sold as the face or the political face, which is nationalist, which doesn't have international agenda, which wants to reintegrate. They themselves are today sidelined. So we really don't know. And ISIS-K, when it started in 2015, it had a certain history. It has grown. Since then, there is a certain contestation, but it was started as a flag of convenience in 2015, so that they took the blame for a lot of the violence that happened even in Taliban, which was very difficult for Taliban to accept at that point in time. Today there could be differences, and I think their ranks will only swell, because there'll be grievanced people even from the Afghan security forces, which who have lost their jobs, who have lost their country. There will be grievance or disillusioned Taliban members, more radical elements who feel that even this sort of engagement with the rest of the world is a sellout. So I really don't know what is happening behind it, but the differences are showing up, and I'm sure Mr. Moradian will tell you much more about that, how that dynamics is playing out in Afghanistan.
Yeah.
But the Taliban, unfortunately, is going to fail. In fact, I just said it failed because of the burden of expectations, both internal and external. Right. Internal, because they'll be unable to provide governance, any economy, any sort of job security, even law and order and security, which they promised that it will happen. It's not happening. And external, because of the expectations the world has that they will change, they will moderate, they'll become inclusive, and they would become a normal government. I think on both these counts they are going to fail. And entire policy is wrong, because we are thinking the Taliban is, or the entity which has taken over Kabul today, is a normal government and is looking for a normal nation state. I don't think that is the correct answer, because the elements which are controlling Kabul are pure proxies. And that is why the Kandhari Taliban has been sidelined, because so it is a territory which is controlled by a terror group, and that is why I say subjugated, because if they did not have weapons, do you think they would have captured Kabul? And people have surrendered. Will they keep quiet for 5 years, 7 years? I don't know.
This, Mr. Moradian, this contradiction in terms, Sirajuddin Haqqani, who is the interior minister of the Taliban regime in Afghanistan, he's the leader of the Haqqani network. And we know the Haqqani network is well known in India because they attacked the Indian embassy in 2008, in which a diplomat as well as a defense attaché was killed. You were in Kabul at the time. But can you explain this contradiction that the Haqqani network is part of the Taliban, but you have an ISIS-K, which is even more extremist or more fundamentalist, even more to the right of the Taliban? And why is the ISIS-K now attacking the Taliban regime? It doesn't make sense.
No, I don't think it does not make sense. It's very sensible thing, very logical, very consistent. I think one vocabulary that we have been using in Kabul and in Delhi has been the terrorist infrastructure. And that infrastructure is a production line. And as with any production line, it needs to remain active. It needs to produce. It needs to update. It needs to upgrade its product because the utility of production means that being in business. Again, with any smartphone that now the generation of iPhone is iPhone 13. iPhone 13, but can we say that there is a fundamental difference between iPhone 13 and iPhone 6, which I have?
Correct.
Which just have backward. I'm still using iPhone 6. No, iPhone 6 and iPhone 13, you may have iPhone 13, come from the same production line because there is the need for new products here. And now we have a terrorist infrastructure in South Asia, and that infrastructure is the state of Pakistan. The state of Pakistan is the true owner of that in terrorist infrastructures. In terrorism infrastructure, therefore they keep producing new products. If we look at back the history of Afghanistan, that lost 5 decades or so. So when Pakistan supported Jamiat Islami, which was led by late Burhanuddin Rabbani, but in order to contain and control Jamiat Islami, Pakistan supported the Hizb Islami of Gulbuddin Hekmatyar. When Gulbuddin Hekmatyar became too powerful, then Taliban were invented, were supported in order to replace Gulbuddin Hekmatyar. Now with the Taliban, the same cycle continues in order to control and contain the Taliban's. We have had the Haqqani. Haqqani was a control agents of the Taliban. Now with the incorporation of the Taliban and Haqqani into one group, there is a need for another containing tool, and that containing tool is Daesh or ISIS-K. Yes. Therefore, all roads of terrorists in Afghanistan led to Rawalpindi. Rawalpindi, which keep inventing different products, different name, different brands for the same business, which is a terrorist infrastructure. And I think one of the major failure of collective failures has been that we have not been able to articulate a consistent narrative about terrorist infrastructures. And that has to be the keywords in Afghanistan and the region has to be terrorism infrastructure. As long as there is a terrorism infrastructures, we will continue to see the brand new products, but of the same nature.
So, Ambassador Sinha, this terrorism infrastructure that Mr. Moradian is talking about, and he's saying that Rawalpindi, which is the headquarters of the Pakistani military and ISI establishment, controls both the Taliban, it controls the ISIS-K or Daesh, and that these are just several manifestations of the terror infrastructure that it controls and manipulates.
Well, I just wanted to, he brilliantly brought out the timeline and how the main characters have changed in the Afghan sort of theater. And in the simplest word, because, unfortunately, too much analysis is based on where the terrorists came from, what their objectives are. We start putting them in different boxes, give them different flags, and start trying to isolate each. It doesn't work like that to my mind. But interesting timeline that I'll add to him, that this switch that happened where Haqqani, which was on the terror list with a bounty, it was 2014, 2015. That is when 3 things happened. First, they had to announce, because Americans started this squad, where the Afghan government came face to face with the Taliban regime. That is when Mullah Omar's death was announced, that is also the first time when the Americans sat with Haqqanis in a conference, I think perhaps for the first time, though they were on their terror list, on their bounty list. And that was the start of sort of mainstreaming of Haqqani, as they were always part of the Taliban, but Shura, etc., but into important positions, and they got mainstreamed. And at the same time, the ISK starts. Now, it could be unconnected, but if you start reading the timelines of a period, you see that these are not unconnected events. It happened because what we learned in school, that I have a line. How do I make this line without destroying it shorter? In school, the teachers told us you just draw a bigger line next to it. This line becomes shorter. So that is what, well, once you normalized Haqqanis by even letting the Americans talk face to face with them, then Haqqanis became part of the Taliban. And that's how you see that they have come. So this placement of Haqqanis to eventually take over Kabul started not today, but in 2015. It's unfolding of a plan that I see.
But Mr. Moradian, this plan that Ambassador Sinha is talking about, and the fact that the Americans met the Haqqanis and normalized the Haqqanis within quotes, why would the Afghanistan government allow that to happen? The Americans were your chief patrons. They paid, all told, like $1 trillion have been spent on this 20-year-long war. We've been told again and again how a few thousand soldiers have been killed. Of course, 70,000 Afghans have been killed in this last 20 years. So there's no comparison. But anyway, we're not comparing, death with death. But the question is that how are the Americans normalizing a terror group like the Haqqani network, and how did you guys allow that to happen?
I think the simple answer to that question may sound offensive to Americans listeners. I think we know that Americans see themselves as in shining city on the hill and American exceptionalism. One pillar of American exceptionalism is, I'm sorry to use this word, stupidity. And that the Americans, they feel that they are entitled to be stupid. They're entitled to be stupid, and that stupidity is one of the main characteristics of American system as a whole, including American strategy towards Afghanistan. And I ask this question many times from Americans, even in when I was in Washington recently. And I say that, how come the deputy leader of a group is proscribed terrorist, Sirajuddin Haqqani, but you engage with the leader of that group? What give me the rationality of that choice? Yes, if there were two different groups, we could justify that there are two different groups. But now, I use the example of the State Department. I says, how come the deputy State Department is proscribed, but the Secretary of the State is engaged with? How do you make sense of it? Therefore, I think there have been too much analysis about some conspiratorial analysis about American system, but I see the American stupidity as the main characteristics, and I think that also is a warning to our colleagues in Delhi that they should not, they should be careful with Americans. They are not that much sophisticated. One wish that we had a sophisticated American, because it would have been much easier to deal with a sophisticated American. But now we have an American which is very powerful, very resourceful, but equally is very stupid in terms of its policy. And to choose a stupid superpower as your strategic ally, as a friend of India, I would caution really about dealing with America.
Mr. Sinha, do you have an answer to that?
No, thankfully I'm not into policy making position now. I'm outside. But I wouldn't call it stupidity. It's not that they don't know. They know it. But I think it's the political exigency and the political system which changes and which sort of wants outcomes in particular timelines, which have led to these fairly stupid ideas, and very frequent changes in how it has happened. But you see, the dilemma that is being faced by not only Americans. Americans have done what they had to do. But look at Taliban is a proscribed organization even in the Russian law. Under various national laws, many of these individuals are terrorist organizations. Importantly, under the UN laws, half of the Afghan cabinet today is a terrorist organization. So what do we do? How do we recognize them? Do we rewrite the international architecture on terror all over again, starting from when was it, 1998 or 1988, the first UN Security Council? So it is actually posing a huge challenge and a dilemma. And obviously, that is why countries are hesitant. That is why yesterday's meeting produced a statement, which, of course, basically repeats what other statements have included. I don't think there was anything new in that. But is Kabul listening is the question. And is it, even if it is listening, is it capable of changing course? I personally believe no, because it will then not be Taliban. It will not be an ideology-driven organization. And it is not only one or two leaders of Taliban, it is the rank and file which will rebel, and there will be a major crisis. So we are looking for a tough haul, but then for the international community to rush to this conclusion that Taliban is the normal template for Afghanistan as a nation state is what I find abhorrent, seriously. Because even the 1996 to 2001 regime of Taliban was an aberration. That was not the norm for Afghanistan as we have known.
Mm-hmm.
And that is why you see so much of diaspora. And in fact, the pain of Afghan diaspora is something historic. It has happened for people of Dawood's generation 3 times in their generation. But even before that, if you remember Kabliwala's famous song, when you said you fled Kabul, and what he said, so I reminded me of that song actually, where he is singing in Calcutta that "Ay mere pyare watan, ay mere bichhade chan, tuj pe dil kurban." So that has been immortalized in Indian movies also. So unfortunately, it has been had the misfortune that they have had to rely on sort of a nomadic existence because of developments at home.
Well, I suppose people like Dawood and his friends and colleagues and the thousands of Afghans, men, women, and children who fled Kabul, who left their beloved homeland, Afghanistan, and are now in their hearts singing that song, "Ae Mere Pyare Watan." I think your comments, Ambassador Sinha and Mr. Davood Moradian, are essential viewing for the Indian government. I hope some people are at least listening and watching. But thank you both so much for your time, Mr. Moradian, to you especially. You're from Herat, not far from Mashhad, where you are speaking to us right now. And Herat, as we know, is just an utterly beautiful city with a blue mosque, such an amazing piece of a monument. And then the citadel where you had your conferences, which Alexander the Great was supposed to have built in 300 BC. And then there is the shrine to the Pir, the Ansari Pir, which lays, and our own former Vice President, Mr. Hamid Ansari, lays claim to that. So these connections between India and Afghanistan that are so many, and which we can continue to talk about, over several hours and weeks. But thank you both so much, Mr. Davood Moradian in Mashhad in Iran and Ambassador Amar Sinha in Delhi. Thank you both for your time.